In the early times, the trees and animals were always able to talk to one another. Every year, when the cold time came, the Benishiang, the birds would fly south where it was warm. One year, as the cold season approached, the sparrow was injured, and he knew that he would not be strong enough to fly to the warm lands, so he made his family fly south without him. Injured, he knew he would not survive the cold season, so he sought the help of the Mitigog, the trees. First, he approached Mitigomij, the oak, relaying his situation. But the oak did not like the idea of having a guest in the winter, so he told the sparrow to go find somewhere else and turned him away. Next, the sparrow went to Aninatig, the maple, and asked her for shelter. She too turned the sparrow away. Sparrow went to each of the trees and asked each for shelter in the cold time, and each and every time the sparrow was turned away until there were no trees left to ask except for the pine. With no hope left, but not willing to accept death, the sparrow approached the pine and asked for shelter. The pine's heart heard Sparrow's plight, and he said, "Sparrow, my leaves are more like tiny needles, but what I have you are welcome to share." The Creator had seen and heard all that had happened between Sparrow and the trees, and so he called the trees together and he said, "You who were given so much would not share the least of what you had with Sparrow and his need. Because of this, from this day forward, when the cold time is upon the land, your Anibishan leaves shall wither and die and blow away."
Now imagine yourself walking through a grove of trees. You breathe in crisp, chilly air. You notice that many of the leaves are brown or yellow and have fallen to the ground. How would you try to understand how and why this is happening? Do you start with a question, develop a hypothesis and a prediction, and create a theory to explain this phenomena? Or do you observe the trees and their relationships to their surroundings and time of year, thinking about the relations that they have to their environment? The first approach aligns with a Western way of thinking, one that many of us here at the university have been brought up with. The second reflects native science, a knowledge system and approach to life that is core to most Indigenous cultures here in Minnesota and worldwide. Bonjour, Rachel, Indigenous, Madison, Wisconsin, Indunjaba.
Mitakiapi, Chloe and Makiapi, the day Oton Otue Evati, Minnesota Hermantaha.
We are Chloe and Rachel, two engineering students who have been immersed in Western science our entire lives. We invite you along on our journey to understand native science and land-based learning.
Native science, or Indigenous knowledge, is a different way of thinking that evolves through the long-term relationships between Indigenous peoples and the places they live. Land and place are essential to native science and a people's knowledge because their interactions are specific to that place. Indigenous knowledge incorporates all of a person's senses as well as their spirituality to develop an understanding based on relationships and reciprocity. In Western science, controlled experiments based on the scientific method usually occur in laboratories, separated from the natural world, where the processes that they are trying to explain actually occur. You need to have the words to describe a phenomena in order to teach others about it. Native science originates through a person's and a culture's interactions with land, which in turn influence their language, which is how knowledge is preserved and passed down. One example of land-based learning involves Ojibwe children walking through a forest with an elder, asking questions and receiving answers not only from the elder they walk with, but from the land that they walk through and interact with. Native languages are an essential part of native science, and their use in teaching is beginning to expand once again through programs such as Learning in Places, which is another example of place-based learning that moves science education from an indoor classroom to a hands-on, outdoor experience that is modeled on native science. Communities work with learning scientists to design programs that work for their specific places, whether they be rural or urban.
Science reflects and upholds the society that created and practices it. The knowledge that Western science produces is often driven by capitalist motives, and grant money is usually obtained only with a profitable end goal in mind. Darwin's theory of evolution has been used to justify the power hierarchies and inequities that result from settler colonialism and capitalism. Geological and environmental sciences have led to the justification of exploitation of people, land, and water for the benefit of settler colonists. However, Despite the negative impacts caused by the science we uphold today, it is also important to note that modern Western science has allowed us to eradicate diseases such as smallpox and has made leaps in treating cancer and other illnesses. Thus, society and science are often intertwined and inextricably linked, so that the values we hold as a society can have a large impact on the science that is being done.
Western science is also beginning to adopt some of the same conclusions as native science in certain areas, such as the medicinal power of willow bark, which resulted in the production of aspirin. However, the Western approach often isolates the most helpful element while ignoring other components connected to it. For example, wild rice is a sacred food, medicine, and relative to the Anishinaabe. It has sustained both Dakota and Ojibwe communities here for thousands of years. At the University of Minnesota, Western scientists are studying and exploiting the genetic makeup of the rice in order to breed it for cultivated crop production. At the same time, however, tribal partners and different Western scientists from the U are working collaboratively to understand the rice and its relationships with our changing world in a respectful way that works with both Native and Western sciences.
As people who have grown up in the dominant knowledge system, we had trouble understanding Native science and different ways of learning. Because Western science is such a dominant part of our lives, we might have never been exposed to different ways of knowing without taking this class. At first glance, this new way of thinking presented a threat to our established ways of thinking and interpreting, and it was only once we had undergone a paradigm shift that we were able to approach and accept Native science. Throughout our journey of learning, we wonder how we can be aware of the biases in Western science and incorporate Native knowledge and perspectives into our work, including making decisions that reflect the important relationships between people, water, land, plants, animals, the sky, and other beings in a way that challenges the current settler colonial ideas of what science is and is not. We realize that it will take time, effort, and mistakes for us to see the world and understand our place in a new way.
As you work to solve problems and understand the issues in our society, take a moment to also question your own approach to learning. How can you broaden your understanding of the world by listening to and connecting with the land and people around you in a new way?